A video on making a sourdough starter, which some people want to try and make as complicated as possible, but it's pretty straightforward and it doesn't need any fancy equipment. We just need a few basic things. We need flour. Doesn't need to be strong bread flour because we're just collecting yeast at the moment, so I'm just using cheap supermarket flour. We are blessed in the UK that our flour that we buy hasn't been chemically bleached, it's been naturally bleached, and it's the same through most of Europe as well. Depending on where you are, you just need to check that your flour is unbleached flour that you're using, because the bleach that potentially someone that's used in the flours will kill the yeast that we're trying to collect. So cheap flour, doesn't need to be bread flour. It can't be flour that's got any additives in that make it rise, so no kind of baking powder, cream of tartar or anything like that, just a plain flour. That's it. And we need water with that. We're also where I kind of come from, we're also kind of quite blessed that they don't put too many additives in the water as well, so you just need to kind of check where you live and what additives they put in your water. So if you're a little bit worried about the water, then I would suggest that you use still mineral water. We need a bowl, we need some scales because we're going to mix things, and that's pretty much it. And we need a few days and a little bit of time every day to do it. Now, yeast is everywhere. It's on work surfaces, it's in the air, it's on your hands, it's in that bowl, it's in that flour, it's everywhere. And what we need to do is we need to collect it and cultivate it so it makes a strong enough culture that we can use it to make bread. So the best way that I have found, so if we kind of imagine that there's three ways that we're going to collect this yeast. There will be some yeast, there will be more natural yeast in some organic flour, but there will still be a little bit of natural yeast in that plain flour, even though it's had things done to it. Just because it's been out in the air and it will have collected naturally some yeast, so there'll be a little bit of yeast already in that flour. There'll be yeast on our hands and there'll be yeast on that bowl, and there's yeast in the air, so we need to kind of collect that and cultivate it. The way we do that is by equal quantities of flour and water. So scales on, and I will start with, I'll start with 200 grams I think. So it's 200 grams of flour, if there's 200 grams in here. Fingers crossed, eh? Yes, there is. So, doesn't need to be perfectly exact. So, 200 grams of flour and 200 grams of water. Then what we're going to do is we're going to mix that with our hands. And hopefully, our hands will have a little bit of yeast on, and that will start off the process. I won't mix it just yet because I'm going to carry on talking. So we're going to mix that, and then we're going to leave it for 24 hours, and hopefully that there will be some yeast in the flour, on my hands, and in the air, which will settle on top of the sourdough starter, which this is the sourdough starter. And we'll repeat that process for 4 or 5 or 6 days. Potentially take a little bit longer in the winter time. We're in the depths of winter, not really depths, so it's not that cold. But it's going to take a little bit longer because of the ambient temperature of your house or wherever you're kind of making this. So I think that's pretty straightforward. So yes, right, so I'll mix, and then we're going to leave it for 24 hours, and we'll come back, and you won't see anything really happen for the first few days. You'll just kind of think it's failed. It starts to come alive in the 4th and 5th and 6th day. So you just need to be a little bit patient. And I'm going to leave it somewhere a little bit warmer, so I'm going to leave it close to a radiator, just so it's got a little bit more heat, because yeast grows better with a little bit of heat rather than something cold. When it's cold, it still grows. It's just when it's a little bit of heat, a little better ambient temperature in the room, it certainly grows a little bit quicker. Right, so your hands need to be clean, but not clean as in you've just washed them. So ideally, if you've been out for a walk and you've had your gloves on, that's a good time to make it once you've taken your gloves off, because your hands will be warm a little bit moist and they'll have collected some yeast on them. Or first thing in the morning, before you go to the toilet, obviously don't go to the toilet and then make your sourdough starter. So you just kind of want your hands to be not washed for a few hours, so they've accumulated a bit of natural yeast, and we're just going to mix with fingers like that. It's a little bit messy, there's nothing wrong with that, so we just need to incorporate everything. Until it forms a paste. Give it a good mix. Entirely important. It's fine, and then we'll just scrape off the excess flour using my other hand. And then that's it. Don't cover it, leave it out for 24 hours, and then hopefully what's going to happen is we're going to collect, there's going to be some yeast already in there, and we're going to, the air will move over the top of that, and some yeast will naturally collect on the top of the starter as well. So that's it for, I don't know how I'm going to turn the phone off now. Now I've got caked and everything. So that's it for 24 hours. We'll come back in 24 hours. There won't be any kind of growth, but I'll show you the next process in 24 hours time. Sourdough starter, day 2. Nothing looks like it's changed whatsoever, and if anything it looks a bit grey on top. However, everything will be fine, and as long as we stick with it, everything will work out. So you imagine that as we talked about, well, as I rambled about, there is yeast in the air all around us. Don't be scared, it's fine. Now that yeast will have collected on the top of the sourdough starter. So that's where the highest concentration of the yeast is going to be. So we don't want to get rid of that top layer. We want to save that. However, we need to get rid of half the starter, and we need to replace that with an equal amount of flour and water. What this does is it gives the starter something to feed on, because well, the yeast is something to feed on because it needs the flour and it needs the water as food. And also it cuts down on, if you were just to leave it out for 5 days and not do anything with it, you would collect yeast, but it would have a harder time growing, and potentially you would pick up other bacteria. So by adding more things to it, you will greaten the chances of not picking up feeding like bad bacteria. That kind of makes sense-ish. So I'm going to pull back the top of the starter, and we're going to pour some of the starter from the underneath into a bowl. The bowl's dirty. I've been doing something else, and I don't really think I'm scruffy. It's just that I really don't like washing up, and if I can cut down on washing up, I do. But I was doing something else with flour and water and all that kind of stuff. So this is the bowl we're going to pour half the starter into. So we'll scrape right at the top of the starter like that, and then we're going to get rid of the bottom of the starter like that. It doesn't have to be exact. So that's the bit there and that bit there that we're going to throw away. Away, and then we've kept the top. As you can see, it's that crusty bit there. We're going to mix that in, so that has a better chance of starting the yeast from growing. And we will add 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. So 100 grams ish, doesn't have to be 100% correct. And then we're going to mix it with our hands, and then what that will do is it will give the yeast that's naturally present on our hands and the chance to add to the culture that we're growing. So that's 100. Oh, spot on, look at that. And then 100 grams of water, and then we'll give it a good mix, and then we'll leave it again for another 24 hours. And things, oops, a little bit over the water, but that's fine. We'll put more flour in. Keep things. That's fine. So we'll give that a mix. Give everything incorporated with hands, which will have bacteria, I keep saying bacteria, but yeast on them. So that will add to the culture. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build up this culture. So we'll start off with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 bits of yeast, and we need to cultivate those so they grow and multiply and give us more yeast. So that's nice and incorporated, looking a bit more healthy. Scrape off starter from fingers back into the bowl. I'll just neaten up around the edge of that a bit as well, but there we go. So that's it for another 24 hours, and then we'll come back and we'll do the same process again, and then we'll do the same process again and again and again until we have some proper yeast growth in the starter. 3 of sourdough starter. So repeat the process again. Take the top of that and mix it into some fresh flour and water. Don't need to explain it. However, what I do need to explain is I'm going to do it the other way around tonight. I'm going to add the top of that to the fresh flour and water in that container, because I just think that's a bit messy around there. And if I leave it any longer, it'll set really hard, and it'll be a bit of a nightmare to get rid of. So equal quantities of water and flour in this one. There's about 130 grams of flour, 130 grams of water. Quantities aren't too important as long as they are equal quantities of flour and water. So we'll take the top off here, and then we'll give a mix in. So that. Nothing looks like it's happening at all yet, but it will do. I have faith, perseverance, and it will happen. So that's about half. Scrape that off there, and then once again with clean hands, but hands that haven't been removed, that have had a bit of time for yeast to collect on them. I'll end up having to dirty both my hands. I can't really do it with that. So we'll mix with this hand, and I'll make a better job of cleaning around the bowl today. Yesterday I got sidetracked with something else, which I always seem to do. So give that a mix. So as before, any moisture, any yeast that's collected on the surface of the starter over the last 24 hours will now be completely incorporated into the fresh flour and water, and they'll be able to build up a culture of yeast a lot quicker. So get rid of that off my hands into the bowl, and then I'll run the finger around, add it off, and then we'll get a cloth just to make that a little bit neater. I was just a bit concerned it was getting looking a bit grey and horrible. Nothing wrong with it, but that's it. So stop this with a clean finger, and then we'll be back in 24 hours to take another look at it and to add some more flour and water. So day 4 of the starter. It looks like we're getting a few bubbles underneath the surface. So same process again, where we'll scrape the top back because that's the bit we want to keep, and then we'll pour some of it underneath away, and then we'll add more flour and water, give a mix with our hands, and then hopefully we'll start to see. It's cold this time of year, so it's I don't need to do that. That's fine. So go on. We'll add 100 grams. Yeah. So it's cold this time of year, so things take a little bit longer if you're collecting yeast or fermenting things or anything like that. Like bread takes a little bit longer to prove, all that type of thing. So 100 grams ish. Grams, bang on. And then 100 grams of water. Ooh, bang on. And then we'll mix with dirty hand. Move it out of the way, we don't want to get that a mess. Although I don't know why I'm using my left hand because I'm right-handed. Trying not to make a mess, but obviously making more of a mess because I'm not left-handed. There we go. I'll make a mess. I'll tidy up around the what we call it, around the side of the bowl, and I'll stop the video before I'm completely covered my hands in sourdough starter. But that's it. So that was 4. Tomorrow we'll do the same process again, and we'll keep on doing it until we've collected enough yeast. Day 5 of Sourdough Starter. We look like we've got some air bubbles. Obviously, there's some. When I mix it up, I'm mixing a little bit of air. That's kind of, I can't really help that. But it looks like we've got some extra air bubbles, which I think is the yeast starting to be in a big enough culture that it's creating carbon dioxide. So we know it's kind of working. So 5 days in, it looks like it's getting somewhere. Like that bubble there looks like it wants to burst the top. So we're going to carry on going. It needs feeding. It needs some more. It needs the yeast that's collected on the top mixing in again. It needs the yeast from my fingers. It needs some yeast from the fresh flour that we're going to put in as well. So scrape back the top. Get rid of underneath. That'll be fine. And then on that. So we're going to put in 100 grams of flour. I'm sure it was yesterday what I put in. I ended up putting like 130 grams worth of flour in. You know, as long as it's in a ballpark kind of figure, it's fine. It does. You know, I would. If you're going to be completely regimented about it, you want to be putting 100 grams of fresh flour in a day. You're going to be getting rid of 100 grams worth of the starter, and you want to be putting like 100 grams worth of. No, that's wrong. You're getting rid of the like 200 grams worth of the starter every day, and you're adding 200 grams, 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. If we're getting completely scientific about it, however, I'm not that scientific about things. So sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's less, as long as you're not putting huge amounts of flour and water into it, and as long as you are adding the same amount of weight of flour and water. That's the most crucial thing. So 100 grams of water. There we go. I mean, a gram of water, there's not a lot. A gram of water is not a lot, so if you kind of go over a little bit, it's fine. Right, so mix with hands. So it'll be some natural yeast on the hands, and then that will start. That'll add to the yeast that's already in there as well. Once it starts getting really active and there's lots of yeast in there, I'll talk about what you kind of need to do with your starter, and we'll make some bread. And I've got the easiest method possible. Well, to be honest, sourdough is a bit of a faff, if I'm honest. But I've got a method that doesn't involve not that much skill, if I'm honest. So I kind of think, and you can always build on things. I think if you watch a video and it's quite complicated, it can put you off. But if you can see a simple way of doing something, and then if you can get that right, then you can move on to doing something that's a little bit more complicated. It's like building confidence, you know. So you don't make your own fresh pasta to start with, but buying pasta sheets and making raviolis out of those is a good way to start. And then if you wanted to make your own pasta, you would then start making your own pasta. So it's just like baby steps with things. So we've mixed all that in, and we'll leave it for another 24 hours. We'll clean everything up, get everything off my fingers, and I'll stop the video, and it'll be another 24 hours time, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more positive growth. Positive growth, I don't know. Yes, that sounds alright. There we go. So, day 6 of Sourdough Starter, and we have some proper yeast culture there. As you can see, all those bubbles coming to the top is the reaction of the yeast growing and producing carbon dioxide. So 6 days, and we have a sourdough starter made with cheap supermarket flour that's It's just a plain flour. It's not particularly strong or anything like that. Just to prove that we can make a sourdough starter quite cheaply. I suppose I can't remember because it was 6 days ago. Strong bread flour is obviously more expensive than the cheap plain flour. So I always kind of think it's a bit of a waste to waste something like strong bread flour, especially since at the start of the pandemic it was quite difficult to get hold of flour. From anywhere. The problem actually wasn't a shortage of flour. There was actually a shortage of the bags that the flour goes into. But anyway, so to use if there's a shortage of anything like strong bread flour again, to use strong bread flour to make a sourdough starter or to feed your starter, it's kind of you don't need to do it. So just to prove that you can just use plain flour to make a sourdough starter, and you can carry on feeding it with just plain flour rather than having to use strong flour. You do have to use as much strong flour as possible when you're making, when you're activating the starter and when you're going to make the bread. But this was just a little interesting experiment. So the heating's been on for quite a lot of since mid-afternoon now. So of course the starter is kind of quite active. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed it one more time. And it will cool down overnight, and then we'll make sure that it's got a nice big concentration of yeast. And then what we'll do tomorrow is we'll talk about the feeding the starter and what to do and to keep it and all that kind of stuff. But there you go. 6 days, you get yourself a sourdough starter with a little bit of persistence? No, patience. There we go. A little bit of patience, you get yourself a sourdough starter kind of quite quickly. So, same process as before. Actually, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the top today because we don't actually need to collect any more. As you can see, that's quite a successful starter as that. That's kind of what you want to be aiming at when you're making bread, to be that active. So we'll get rid of that nasty bit off the top. We don't really want that anymore. That's going to make a mess. So we'll get rid of that today. We don't need to add any more yeast. All we really want to do is to feed this starter. So we'll get rid of half of it. Actually, we could just store that now as a starter, but I just want to keep it going a little bit longer. And then we have a nice big culture. So we'll put in 100 grams. And 100 grams of water, as always, a little bit over with the flour, but it doesn't matter too much. And then we don't need to mix with our hands because we've already got plenty of yeast in there. And slightly over on the water, so a little bit more flour. That's fine. And then we'll mix with the spoon today, so I don't have to wash my hands and make a mess of my phone. So this will just make sure that we've got a proper starter going and it's nice and fed, and then it'll be really, really, really active tomorrow. What tends to happen is if the flour and the water feed and allow the yeast to grow, but as food, the yeast eats all its food. So you kind of need to give it more food so it can carry on growing. And as a starter, that was kind of quite an active starter, as you can kind of see. So if it's active, we know that it's eating quite a lot of its food, so we need to feed it some more. So this is the reason I'm doing this, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do with the starter in the next video, because it's getting a bit late now and I really don't want to make another video. Faff around. I've been faffing around with something else today, and I don't really want to have to. I've still got a bed to make. I need to make the bed, and I want to sit down, and I wouldn't mind a cocktail. I'm going to watch a film, and I thought of just having to make another video that's kind of quite long is just a little bit just something I just don't want to do at the moment. Anyway, so we'll clean up, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow. Day 7 of Sourdough Starter. It would be day 6, but it was a bit late last night, as I explained just a little bit before this bit of the video. The starter is now fully alive and a little bit active. I've just had a bit of a poke around a bit, and you can see that underneath there is some air bubbles, which means that it's alive and it is producing carbon dioxide. Now what we need to do is we need to keep the starter alive, which is just a simple case of what's called feeding it some flour and some water, and you need to do that twice a week. However, you can forget to do these type of things, so at this stage it is best to freeze some of your sourdough starter, and then you've always got a backup in the freezer, because you've just taken 6 days to make something, and if you end up killing it by not feeding it, or something goes wrong, then it's a little bit soul destroying for you to start having again. And also your starter improves the flavour over time. So if you can systematically every couple of months take some of the starter and freeze that starter, it will have improved in flavour as well. So it's like the older the starter is, the better flavour it gives the bread. So slight wash of the hands, get rid of that. So we need to feed it. I need a spoon. I should be best prepared. I'm not. So this is the starter that's going to go in the freezer. It's fine. So we'll put it in. Oh, I never measured that. What was that? We'll have a guess. That was about a tablespoonful. So that was 14. So okay, 14 to 20. Right, so about 34 grams in there, ish. Always an ish. That'll be fine. We'll see with the consistency. So 34 grams of water, and this just all the freezer does, it just slows down the growth of the yeast. So that's 34. We'll give it a mix. So it still needs feed. It still needs food when it's in the freezer, just to keep it alive. And also when you take it out of the freezer, it's going to defrost, and in that defrosting time, it's going to need some food as well. So we'll give it a bit of a feed, and then we'll freeze it, and then that's our backup sourdough starter. You don't have to do this. If you're confident you can keep your sourdough starter alive, you don't need to do this, but I would just recommend it. I nearly killed my sourdough starter one time, and it was absolutely heartbreaking, because I had it for almost a year and I nearly killed it, and I was devastated, and the thought of having to make it all again was just too much. So freeze that bit of the sourdough starter, and then you've got your backup. And then every few months, freeze some of your starter that you've kept alive over the months, and because it will improve with flavour over that time. And then you can throw the older starter that you've got in the freezer away because you're replacing it. Right, so that's that. Feeding your starter, which is pretty much the same as what we've just done. So I need some of that because I'm going to make some bread today. So starter in a jar. That's enough. I can't put any more in. So start it in the jar, that in there, and then we're going to add a good amount of flour and water, and then we'll keep that alive. So they kind of say you should feed your starter every 5 days. I say 4, if I'm honest. I just slightly worry about keeping it alive, and I think if you forget to feed it on the 5th day, you've gone to the 6th day. If you forget to feed it on the 4th day and you remember the next day, it's still only 5 days. So we'll put in 100 grams of flour, and 100 grams of water, and then that'll give it plenty of food, and it can sit happily in the fridge. Put a lid on it, but don't tie the lid too tight, because obviously in the fridge it's gonna carry on fermenting in the fridge. So air needs to escape, or carbon dioxide needs to escape. So there we go. Now we can use the spoon from the starter, give that a mix, and that's it. So every 4 days, give it 50 grams of water, 50 grams of plain flour, and then that'll keep it alive. And as long as you do it every 4 days, it'll be fine. And you'll find over time that it improves the flavour of the bread, and you also start getting a better quality of bread as well. So it'll rise better as well as the culture gets a little bit older and more mature. So that's it. That is sourdough starter, how to make it, and then how to keep it alive, and also having a bit of a backup plan. So that's that. I'm sure that's pretty much it. Yeah, it can. I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but now that can now live in the fridge with a lid on it. I'll just look at that lid. So it's just a lid on top, just a loose. So it's not that's tight. That's just a lid on the top, and then that's safe. That'll live in the fridge. Feed it every 4 days. 50 grams of water, 50 grams of normal flour. You don't need to use strong flour. And that'll sit happily in the fridge until you need it. I think that's it. I'm sure that's it. Oh yeah, we'll come to a stage. If you don't make a lot of bread, you get to a stage where you have quite a lot of starter in the jar. Just throw it away. It's fine. Just throw half of it away. Feed it again, and then put it back in the fridge. If you find that you're not making as much bread as you thought you would do. But that's it. That's it for, yeah, I'm sure that's it. I can't think of anything else. I'll probably think of something else later. But anyway, that's it.